Hey everybody, this will be part three of federalism. I did not record a part one. Part one was just about the Enlightenment. Maybe I need to record that. I'm not sure. I probably will. So we're going to pick up where I left off in the last video on federalism. Make sure you write this down. Federalism is the sharing of powers and the division of powers between the states and the national government. Now, when I say the national government or the federal government, I mean the government that is based in Washington, D.C., with the president and Congress and the House of Representatives, the Senate, the Supreme Court, the federal, that's the national government. Okay. Um, so write this down, and then you need to have this written down. Now, and this has been improved since the last video, but whatever. There's a lot of words on here. Okay, if you don't want to write this down while I'm talking, then hit pause. So, when we talk about enumerated powers, we mean those powers that are in the Constitution. The federal government has, it's clear as day written in the Constitution that this is a power of the federal government, the national government. So that means include declare war, maintain the army, regulate interstate and foreign trade. So if you are selling goods to someone in Arkansas, that is under the federal government. That is the national government because it's enumerated. It's in the Constitution that that's what the federal government does. Once you cross state lines, that is a federal issue. Foreign policy. You don't see people from Alabama having foreign policy with Cuba. No, that's a national thing. Then on the far right, you have reserved powers. So what the Constitution says is that powers that are not enumerated are reserved for the state. So if it's not listed explicitly in the Constitution and it's not in an amendment, then that power is reserved to the state. Okay, so what do states do? They deal with schools. You don't have the federal government. They talk about schools, but they only talk about schools because people want them to talk about schools. But most people are ignorant. Biden really has no say over schools. Trump had no say over schools for the most part. States can establish local governments, like the state of Texas will establish the Dallas city government. States regulate business within the state, and states make marriage laws. That's important because, it brings up the question, can Alabama stop gay marriage or something like that? As of right now, the answer is no. Okay. And then here's another term you need to know, and that is concurrent. Concurrent. So it means shared powers. It means the feds have this power and the states have this power. So all of these are important. They can both tax you. They can both maintain law and order. They can both borrow money, charter banks, establish courts, and they both provide for the public welfare. Okay? Both the states and the feds can do all of that. Think of the word concur. I know it's not a very common word, but it's a fancy way of saying agree. Do you concur? Do you agree? I don't know if that works, but all right. So hit pause if you need to, but this is a lot of information. We wrote this on one note card. Okay, it's a lot, but there you go. All right. So we wrote this down recently. Make sure you know the word enumerated. If you don't want to write this down because the Venn diagram explains it to you, fine. But enumerated is a fancy word for federal powers, national powers. Reserved means it's reserved for the state power, states' rights. Concurrent powers means shared. If you want to make that 3 note cards or 1, that's fine, but you need to write this down. You need to know what these words mean. Okay? All right, write this down. What is the 10th Amendment? 10th Amendment says that it deals with states' powers or states' rights. If it's not enumerated, meaning it's not clearly expressed in the Constitution, then that power is reserved to the states. There, I used the fancy word there. So that's what happened with abortion recently in the summer of 2022. The Supreme Court decided that since abortion laws were not codified in the Constitution or anywhere else, then that means that abortion is left up to the states. And that's what's been going on since 2022. Now each state can make its own abortion laws. Whether you like it or not, whether you support abortion or not, that's what happened in summer 2022. Okay? It's now a federalism issue. It's a state by state issue. And the national government right now has very little say over it. Okay? You will not see any questions about abortion on the AP government exam, just so you know. I bring it up because I think it's interesting and I think that it's relevant. Okay? All right, moving right along. All right, so we'll talk about this stuff later. So this this part of the chapter is on federalism. Federalism, the big question, and there is no real answer because it's an ongoing debate. To what extent does the federal government have the right to tell states what to do? To what extent do states have rights that the federal government cannot take away? 10th Amendment. And it's an ongoing debate. And there are several issues that are really important with federalism. Marijuana is one of them. Nationally, marijuana is an illegal narcotic drug, but some states have legalized it for recreational purposes and sell it legally. Technically, it's against federal law for people in Colorado to sell marijuana, but that's where federalism comes in. It's a debate over federal powers versus state powers. Some of you might be like, "Yay, states' rights!" I get that. But do you believe in Mississippi's right to, ban trans people from existing? Maybe you'd think differently about that. Or do you think Georgia should keep African Americans from voting because they thought that was states' rights too? So that's kind of what federalism is about: this states' rights versus national powers. This is a map that's pretty current about abortion rights in the United States. Again, this will not be on the AP government exam, but I thought you might get a kick out of it. Okay? And this is since summer 2022. Okay? All right, moving right along. There are other debates. For example, there's the debate over immigration. If Arizona wants to be extra strict on their immigration laws, do they have a right to do that? That's a federalism issue? Does California have a right to have higher air pollution standards than other parts of the country? Okay. So I need you to write this down. This is a very important Supreme Court case. In the AP government exam, there are required Supreme Court cases that you need to be aware of. This is one of them. McAuliffe versus Maryland. Okay. Heimler's History has a video that's 4 minutes long. You should watch it. I will link it for you in Google Classroom. But you should watch most of his videos anyway. That's how I learn. Okay. So this is a Supreme Court case way back in the 1800s. Maryland, and by the way, SC, that's my abbreviation for the Supreme Court. MD is Maryland. So Maryland tried to stop a federal bank, a national bank, from opening. They threatened the federal government with taxes, saying that if you put this federal bank on our state property, then we will tax the federal government. So there was this big fight over it. They took the case all the way to the Supreme Court, and this is what the Supreme Court decided. The Supreme Court ruled that the federal government, the national government, can establish a bank in Maryland due to the necessary and proper clause. In the Constitution, there is a clause called the necessary and proper clause. It says that if a power is enumerated and it is a legit power of the federal government, then the federal government can do whatever is necessary and proper to execute this enumerated power. Yes, the federal government is limited, but if they do have a power, like power to, regulate commerce, then they have the power to put a bank in Maryland. That is a right that the feds do have a right to do. Okay? So necessary and proper clause, that's important. And states such as Maryland cannot tax the federal government. That's the supremacy clause. Supremacy clause says that the feds are supreme over the states, as long as there isn't some specific states' rights. When there is a conflict between the feds and the feds will usually win. If it's an enumerated power, okay, and it's clear. And that's it. Watch the Heimler's video on that, and then you'll hear it again. And you'll hear basically what I just told you, and you'll get a little bit better putting in your brain. Okay. All right, moving right along. So here's a quote. Under the Supremacy Clause of Article 6, legitimate national laws trump conflicting state laws. As the court observed, quote, the government of the Union, though limited in its powers, is supreme within its sphere of action and its laws. When made in pursuance of the Constitution, form the supreme law of the land. So basically what I just said, the national government reigns supreme as long as it's within the scope of the Constitution. Okay? That doesn't mean that the feds can require us to wear flowered shorts. Okay? There are limits. All right. In situations of conflict between state and national law prevails due to what? The answer is A, the Supremacy Clause. If you said C, you got it backwards. The 10th Amendment is about states' rights. Okay? All right. In McCullough versus Maryland, 1816, the Supreme Court ruled that the answer is C, necessary and proper clause. Okay? All right. So here's another federalism case. Write this down. Okay, let's go back and look at these cartoons real quick. You just wrote them down. Okay, so here's a cartoon talking about state power versus federal power. It's very broad. And then here's a cartoon that's kind of making fun of Republicans. Something you need to know, elephants symbolize Republicans and donkeys symbolize Democrats. There is no reason for that. It's just the way it is. Okay? So again, if states have rights, does California have a right to raise their standards for vehicles? That's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. Okay? All right, let me tell you the story about this major required Supreme Court case. 1995, a student named Lopez was caught with a gun on campus. Now, so he was arrested under a federal law. You might have seen the signs around school that say no gun zone, things like that. Well, he was arrested under a federal law. And his case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And this is what the Supreme Court of the United States said. The Supreme Court found that the federal government did not have the power to make that law. Why? Because when they made this law, they meant well, but how can a Congress justify outlawing guns near schools? I mean, that seems like a violation of states' rights. How did they justify it? Congress said that under the Commerce Clause, because, when you go to school, you are affecting everyone's ability to engage in commerce. If you are in danger at school, then that is going to negatively affect our economy. So we need to keep students safe for the sake of our economy. And the Supreme Court heard this argument and they said, what a bunch of crap. And I'm not into guns rights or anything like that. I'm just saying that's what they said. They said you cannot use the Commerce Clause of the Constitution and this interstate commerce power that you have to just make up a law and just say that it has something to do with commerce. This gun-free zones around high schools and elementary schools don't have anything to do with commerce. So that's what the Supreme Court in 1995 said. And so this is an example of a Supreme Court case where power was given back to the states. So not all Supreme Court cases say that the federal government is supreme. This one gave power back to the states. Okay. All right. So know that case. It is a required case for this course. All right. One thing I want you to know, and this is a little bit historical, but federalism used to be where you keep the state stuff separate and the federal stuff separate. But starting in the 1930s, President Franklin Roosevelt and his New Deal programs changed all that. The New Deal during the Great Depression permanently increased the role of the federal government. Permanently. So when you think of the New Deal, I want you to think about Social Security. Think about the Securities and Exchange Commission to regulate the stock market, or the FDIC to regulate your bank deposits to make sure that they are safe. So the federal government permanently increased its role in everyone's lives. And then in the 1960s, President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, and his Great Society, his social programs like welfare, food stamps, and Medicare, Medicaid, and the Civil Rights Act. And this is important, and we need to write this down, but I don't have this in here. The Civil Rights Act made the states follow the 14th Amendment. That is a great increase in federal power. So, and I don't teach it like that when I teach history, but now I can't. The Civil Rights Act of 63 forced the states to respect federal constitutional laws of everybody in their state. That's why the Civil Rights Act was such a big deal. And it permanently increased the role of the federal government. Okay. Okay. I'm going to pause it for you. Write this down. If you want to make this 3 note cards, that's fine. That would make a good note card. Fiscal federalism. Fiscal means money. Okay. So when you talk about fiscal policy, you're talking about economics, right? Interest rates, inflation, things like that. So part of fiscal federalism is this. If the federal government can't tell states what to do, then maybe the federal government can just bribe the states, give them money, and say, we'll give you billions of dollars if you do what we want you to. And that's how a lot of federalism is nowadays. So like with Medicaid or food stamps, Medicaid, you need to know, Medicaid is health insurance for the poor. Okay. A categorical grant is this. Feds give the states money with specific instructions on how to spend it. Okay. So with Medicaid, the feds will give the states money and say, you have to spend this on poor people's medical care. That's a categorical grant. Okay. But if you were a state, you would prefer block grants. A block grant is when states get money from the federal government with few restrictions. Okay. So it's not exactly just a giveaway, not quite. I'll give you an example of a block grant. Um, Back in the 70s, the federal government wanted all the states to raise the drinking age to 21. The states were like, well, you can't make us do it. Plus, we're making money off of alcohol, right? So the federal government said this: I tell you what, we'll give you billions of dollars in highway money as long as you raise the drinking age to 21. And that's how the drinking age got to 21, a block grant. Now, it wasn't specific how this money was supposed to be spent, just on highways. That's very broad. That is a block grant. So let me ask you this. If you were a state like, let's say, Connecticut or Texas, would you prefer categorical grants or block grants? You would prefer block grants because there's more freedom, more flexibility in how to spend the money. Okay? All right, write this down. What is a mandate? A mandate is when the federal government tells the state what to do, okay, and the people. You might have heard of mask mandates. Here's an example of a mandate, okay? President Biden signed a mandate requiring all federal employees and federal contractors to get vaccinated for COVID. That is a mandate, okay? And the courts have ruled against this mandate, saying that that was overreach. So the court is doing its job, checks and balances. Okay, the Supreme Court overruled that mandate. But that is what a mandate is. And it didn't work, but that was an attempt at a mandate. Now, here's a term I've seen a few times: unfunded mandate. It's a mandate by the feds without the feds providing money to execute them. Okay, no money involved, unfunded. I'll give you an example. We're back in the 70s, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and it requires all buildings to have wheelchair access, handicap parking, all that stuff. Now, who's going to pay to repaint the parking lot? Who's going to pay for the elevators? Who's going to pay for the wheelchair ramps? Well, not the federal government. That is an unfunded mandate. Okay? The feds did not provide money. Okay. So just remember this about states. States love money, but they don't like being told what to do. Oh, yeah, we want your money, but don't give us any restrictions. Okay. Now, by the way, you don't need to write all this down. I've got devolution on the next slide, but I want to point out that conservatives, and I'm not dogging on conservatives, but conservatives like Ronald Reagan are did try to take power away from the federal government and give it back to the states. Our President Ronald Reagan said this: government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. You see that? That's a conservative philosophy. Liberals, on the other hand, are like, let's make a law. The government can solve all of our problems. Okay, that's more extreme liberalism. Okay. All right, write this down. Devolution is a conservative movement to give power back to the states. For example, President Nixon back in the 70s had something called revenue sharing. Okay, revenue sharing is simply giving the states money without any, just sharing the money with them. It's just a giveaway. It's a way to curry favor with voters and with state politicians and stuff like that. Also, the recent abortion case, the Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Clinic, that's also taking power away from the federal government and putting it to the states. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that these are examples of devolution, bringing power back to the states. Okay. So revenue sharing is like categorical grants and like I should have said block grants there. Revenue sharing is like block grants, but with even fewer restrictions. It's just, it's just free money basically. Okay. That was Rick Nixon's revenue sharing plan. Okay. But again, just remember that the trend has been for whenever conservatives are in charge, they want to give more power to the states and less power to the federal government. That's been the general trend. All right. Which of the following is true of federalism? Okay. The wrong answers here are tricky. They look good, but the right answer is clear. You just wrote it down. The answer is, and if you get it wrong, it's because you didn't write it down, probably. The answer is D. Okay. All right. All right, here we go. Proponents, people who push the devolution revolution, argue what? All right, make sure that your answer has to do with devolution and make sure your answer is something that a conservative would say. All right, the answer definitely not C, definitely not D. The answer is B. More state power, less federal power. National laws that direct state or local governments to comply with federal rules or regulations, but do not include funds to help defray the cost, are called what? The answer is B. Unfunded. The feds, they make the law, but they don't help you pay for it, like wheelchair ramps and elevators. Okay. All right. Um, Another example, I'm a little confused on this, but the states, they run the schools. States run the schools. No Child Left Behind was the federal government saying, and George W. Bush meant well. He was trying to help people get a better education. He meant well. But the states run the schools, not the federal government. But Bush and the Congress passed this law, No Child Left Behind, and what it led to was federal oversight of schools. It's not a lot, but it is something. And so, and this is kind of where we started like having test after test after test, and we're still doing that even today, just a lot of tests. But the government didn't pay for a lot of this stuff. So some people say this is an unfunded mandate because the government didn't pay Pearson millions and millions of dollars to make these tests. Okay. And then there's the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Obamacare. Um, it's the federal government basically trying to mandate that everyone buy health insurance. It was good intentions, but can you require individual citizens to pay for a health insurance plan? The Supreme Court said yes, but and the Affordable Care Act is still around, but healthcare is definitely not affordable because of it. I like Obama, but this law just it has saved lives, but other than that, I can't really defend it too much. Okay. The government had never before made citizens buy any product or service. Now the government, as when Obama and Democratic Congress passed it, now it's like people are required to buy it. That's never been done before. Okay. So here's a political cartoon making fun of the Affordable Care Act. He didn't buy his health insurance. Here's a general conservative cartoon poking a little fun at Obama. Reagan says, government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. Okay. Then Obama says, government is the solution to every problem. Now, he never said that, but, it's just a cartoon. It's a conservative cartoon poking fun at Obama. Okay. And here's a cartoon poking fun at No Child Left Behind. Okay. And this is telling me that people think of it as an unfunded mandate. It's like we have to pay for our own hoops. Okay, moving right along. All right, write this down. So, part of federalism is states don't have the right to just reject everything that other states do. For example, if I married my wife in Arkansas and then I moved to Texas, would I have to get married again? The answer is no. And as of the year 2015, if I married my husband, I am a man and I married my husband, I could still move to another state and my marriage would be recognized. That's as of the year 2015. The Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage is basically legal around the country. Okay. But yeah, states must recognize legal judgments of other states. They also must extradite prisoners to other states, other states. That's called the full faith and credit clause. Okay, so if Texas makes the law and then you move to Maryland, Maryland has to respect that to a large extent. Okay, some other things. I already mentioned extradition. Number 3, privileges and immunities clause. Yeah, it's pretty vague. I haven't really talked about it. I'm not, but make sure you understand. One, you write it down. Number 2, you don't have to write it down, but you need to know it. Okay. All right. Write this down. Dual federalism. So a long time ago, they used to keep state powers and federal powers separate. Think of that as layer cake federalism. Then in the 1930s, with Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, federalism became more complicated. So we could call that marble cake federalism, where state and federal powers are more mixed in and they're just all over the place. It's a lot more complicated now than it was before Franklin Roosevelt and before President Lyndon Johnson got the government more involved. Okay. Cooperative federalism. Powers and policy assignments are shared between states and the national government. So it's just a lot of sharing. It's a lot of sharing and cooperating. All right. It's talking about the 30s. So it's more than just, I guess this is the marble cake. Okay. That's the marble cake federalism, where the states and the feds are intertwined. So this is cooperative federalism over here. This is dual federalism. Okay, make sure you write that down. Make sure you have it written down, okay? All right, now this is just more interesting. Remember, part of the class is to be able to read maps and charts and graphs and stuff. So look at this. Which states rely most on federal aid? Okay. And if you look, is there a trend? Well, I mean, one thing that I've heard a lot is that some Republican states, and you don't know which states are Republican and Democrat yet, maybe you do, but if you look at a lot of these red states, the highest numbers are states that vote Republican. So it's really interesting because they won't vote for a Democrat. They'll vote for a Republican, but then they'll want to keep bringing in that federal money into their state. Okay. Is that fair? I don't know. Okay. But it's just something to think about. But when you got the most liberal state taking in the least amount of federal aid, that, I don't know. I mean, I hope I'm not picking on anybody, but it's just something to consider. I'm surprised Alaska isn't higher than that because the individuals people are all on welfare and stuff. Maybe the state just doesn't receive that much. And this is an interesting map. It's like, you pay, your state pays in taxes. How much are you getting back? How much is the state getting back? So really, it's kind of like the last map in a way. I'm just not seeing a lot of trends here. Okay. All right, so we're almost done. The clause that ensures that judicial decrees and contracts made in one state will be binding and enforceable in another state is called the what clause? The answer is full faith and credit. Full faith and credit clause. Okay. The terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001 have had what impact on federal power? All right, so we talked about the New Deal, more federal power. We talked about Lyndon Johnson with food stamps and the projects and Medicare, Medicaid, more federal power. After September 11th, 2001, the government got more power with the Patriot Act in its ability to spy on citizens and stuff like that. So the answer is more power. Okay. The TSA at the airports, think about that. Okay. All right. That's it for Unit 1. All right. Study those note cards.